Today we're going to read Kenny and the Dragon, Chapter 8, George Our Slayer. So it turns out that George really was a royal knight. I suppose that truly does make this a fairy tale, for one cannot conjure up an image of dragons without thinking of brave knights and impudent kings. These days, however, there are not too many stories of this sort left, and many involve much darkness before their happy ending. So we must march on and see what is in our store for our little lad Kenny. And here's George as a knight, and then there's the little rabbits and other critters in the town. Kenny squinted at George, who shone from head to toe in golden fluted armor. He was astride his brilliant white mount, which was adorned in rich fabrics and tassels. In one gauntlet hand he carried a large shield with a fierce dragon etched into it. In the other he held a long lance with a faded royal standard hanging from its pointed tip. People had turned out from all over. Some had even traveled in from as far as Meadow Falls. The streets were jammed with zealous townsfolk yelling and waving brightly colored banners with the word George printed on one side and Dragon Slayer on the other. From the rooftops, revelers threw flower petals down to the gallant knight below. Ladies swooned, and trumpets and horns blared as the procession began its march down the cobblestone streets. "George our Slayer! George our Saint!" the chant from the crowd rang out through the air. Kenny felt dizzy. His mother and father were confused. "Wait a second. Why is the bookshop owner all gussied up on a steed?" his father asked aloud. An urchin standing next to them, waving a wooden sword, smiled and said, "That old-timer there is Georgie, the knight who's gonna go up on that hill tomorrow and kill the vicious dragon." Kenny's father's eyes went wide. His mother put her paw to her mouth. "Oh, my!" she cried. Both of them looked over to their son. He was completely deflated. How could this be stopped? Kenny's father knelt down in front of him. "Kit, you were right. You've got to get to your pal George and tell him what's going on. Ma and I will go back and talk to Graham." And there Kenny's daddy's talking to him. Do they want anything to happen to Graham?
No.
No. The whole rabbit family likes him. "It's useless," Kenny said over the din of the cheering crowd. "I've already tried speaking to Graham, but he doesn't understand." The river from his stomach started burning in his eyes again. His mom put her hand on his shoulder. "We'll be able to discuss it with him over lunch. You know that a full stomach allows the brain to be hungry for common sense. We'll talk to him." They turned to go. "You got to make this right with George, son," his father said. "I know you can do it." Kenny watched his parents shuffle off into the sea of rowdy, screaming villagers. His mother gave one quick glance over her shoulder and nodded before they disappeared into the mass. He stood there, dazed, as the bystanders pushed and shoved their way around him, following the parade. "It's no use trying to get close to George," he muttered to himself, "and even if I could, he won't be able to hear me. I'm just going to have to wait this out." And so he did. Kenny sat all afternoon and watched as the boisterous gathering cheered and led the proud, chivalrous knight clear across town and back again. As his eyes followed George trotting about on his gallant mount, Kenny thought to himself, "Maybe I overreacted back at the shop. Maybe I should have stayed and talked to George. After all, we are good friends, too. It shouldn't be so hard to tell him about Graham." The procession finally stopped at the center of town, at the old Round Brook Inn, where they poured into the tavern to continue the celebration. Should Kenny have talked to George at the bookshop?
Yeah.
I think so, too. Kenny ran into the crowd, wiggling his way through the legs and butts, and peered in through a greasy window. There was George, standing on the bar and toasting, with the townsfolk pressed all around him. "He'll burn my crops for sure. You must get rid of him," one farmer yelled out. "He'll sneak into our house and eat all 3 of my daughters," another woman cried. "He'll destroy our homes, eat our livestock. You have to save us. Kill the dragon! Kill the dragon!" they all began to chant. Is that true?
No.
No. How can Can they want someone killed they don't even know? Kenny said under his breath. How can George just blindly do whatever the king says? The Riverstone stomachache was starting to melt away to another feeling, a fiery feeling. Good people of Roundbrook, George declared, fear not, for you will all be safe and sound. You have my word. Now go on home to your friends, your farms, your families, and rest easy, for when the sun sets tomorrow night, this monster, this devil, this beastly scourge, will be spitting from your land. Well, of course the crowd burst into uproarious applause as they carried the knight out of the inn on their shoulders. Bidding them all good night, George took his weapons, hopped onto his steed, and headed back home. The shadows grew long, signaling the end of a busy day as the knight turned down his empty street. There he found our lad Kenny, sitting and waiting on his doorstep. Kenny, my boy, my squire, you scooted off this morning so quickly. Where on earth did you go? Are you feeling better? Kenny took George's shield and lance from him while the knight dismounted. Immediately the lad was reminded of the night that he first met Graham. They were bidding each other farewell as the Drake handed back Kenny's own makeshift weapons. Now, as he held the actual weapons, he felt like the river within him was frozen. He shook it off, focusing on George, and replied, A little bit. Actually, I came back to talk to you and... Did you see the parade? I kept an eye out for you. What a sight! What a spectacle it was! I felt like I was in the prime of my youth once again. And there's George in his suit of armor. I did, Kenny said, tying George's mount to a street sign. I had just gotten back from seeing that friend of mine I was telling you about earlier, remember? And Can you help me with these buckles, lad? George asked as he rushed into his shop. He poked his head back out the front door when he realized that Kenny hadn't moved. Come on, I do want to hear about your friend, but I have to tell you about tomorrow. Just give me a hand with this coat of mail. Kenny sighed, trailing behind him, arriving back in George's little home on the second floor. That's a good boy. I've forgotten how hot this armor is. I haven't worn it in years, the knight said as he began to unbuckle the metallic pieces. Kenny helped his friend out of his suit of armor and set the parts carefully back into the trunk. Even though the pieces were heavy and clanged while George wriggled out of them, Kenny had never seen his old pal so sprightly before. Phew, that's much better, the knight said, and went to the icebox. I'm parched. Do you want something to drink? Kenny went to answer, but before he could speak, the excited George handed him a bottle of birch beer and cut him off. Hold on a sec. I'll be right back. I've so much to talk to you about, and I need my... The lad heard George's voice drift away as the knight scurried back downstairs to the bookshop for something. He had to tell George about Graham. He took a big swig from his birch beer. Just take a deep breath and say it, he said to himself. George, the dragon you're about to slay is more interested in buttercups than battles, so you have to call off the fight. Okay? Okay. While he waited for the knight's return, the lad looked around the transformed study where the ongoing chess game had been. On top of the chessboard lay the scroll with the official orders from the king. Above a stack of books on George's wall hung the dusty, faded tapestry. Kenny approached it, and after blowing off a layer of dust, could now see that it was embroidered with a knight piercing a dragon in the heart. Finally, his eyes fell on the polished shield with the dragon etched on it. The image was beastly. The wicked Drake had fire blasting from its mouth and nose. It was nothing at all like Graham, who just the other night had used his fire breath to light his dad's pipe by blowing a tiny spark out of his left nostril. However, like Kenny's frying pan from his first visit with the dragon, George's shield was blotched with scorch marks, real scorch marks, made from fiery breath. George dashed back into the study. I knew this was here somewhere. I just had to dig around a bit. He cleared his table, the chessboard, and the scroll, and slapped down a large brown roll of parchment. It's a map of the area, he said, beaming, and I would like to discuss strategy with you, Kenny. You know Shepherd's Hill like the back of your paw, So how do you think we should best take our approach?" George sat eagerly waiting for the lad's response. Kenny had never seen him so vibrant, so alive before. This wasn't going to be easy to do, but he had to do it. I can't help you, George," he said. There, he thought to himself, that wasn't so hard. Keep going. "You see," he continued aloud, "there is, something very important I've been meaning to tell you about the dragon." Sensing that something was once again amiss, the knight put his large arm around the young rabbit and spoke softly. "Spit it out, lad. What is it? What's troubling you? Are you afraid of it?" "Not really," Kenny replied, furrowing his brow a bit. And here's a picture of Kenny looking at George's shield, the one he'd used to fight dragons. "Because it's okay if you are," said George. "No, really, I'm not," Kenny said, setting his bottle down, that fiery feeling flickering in his stomach. "You see, you are so brave, young squire. Charlotte told me it was sighted very close to your house, and I know your family's in danger." "No!" Kenny yelled. The fire in his stomach completely overtook him, burning away the river stones. "That's not it at all. Just listen to me. You don't understand anything. Graham is a good dragon, a peaceful dragon. He doesn't like to fight. He's never fought a day in his life, but his brothers did, and they were all killed by knights. Knights just like you, and now you have orders from the king to kill him, and the stupid king doesn't even know him. You don't even know him. Do you know what he likes to do?" George was blinking at the boy. His mouth was slightly open. You think George was expecting that?
No.
"He likes painting sunsets, listening to classical music, playing piano, reading, and creme brulee. He's... The boy could no longer keep the river down, and it started trickling out, burning his eyes. "He's my best friend, and I don't want to lose either of you in some dumb fight to the death." With his mouth still agape, George studied the boy, watching him wipe his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. Sniffling, Kenny got up to leave and turned back to the old man. "You said a friend of yours is a friend of mine. Of all the people in the world, who could have helped me and Graham? I thought of you. You two are the only ones who really understand me." Kenny stood in the doorway, looking the old knight in the eyes. "I even thought you two might just become friends." With that, the boy ran down the stairs, out the front door, and into the gaslit streets towards home.